But the next time I am told to write something new, try something new, be a little less militant, a little more elegant, to stop exaggerating the social and political climate, to just write a damn love poem and be done with it, I will simply ask, then who will right the wrongs we ignore? The slightly less hip causes that are only remembered by politicians to swing elections, who will write about the burqa ban and children needlessly dying in the south of Sudan? Who will write about the Northern Territory intervention, racial vilification, racism, sexism, and every other God-forsaken ism? Who will teach our children how to right these wrongs when we are too afraid to so much as put pen to paper to simply write of these wrongs?
Tonight we're going to be looking at a topic that's very rarely spoken about, namely what ordinary people do when they're threatened with the violence of war and conflict, and the creative ways in which they protect themselves. So at the Humanitarian Crisis Hub, we believe that it's important that voices are heard, that the voices of refugees and migrants are heard. And this is for many reasons. Firstly, obviously, refugees and migrants have got an intimate knowledge of the conflicts that they have experienced. And so they have a lot to contribute to the public debate around issues to do with their countries of origin. Secondly, by highlighting the positive roles that migrant and refugee organisations play in Australia, we can go some way to counteracting some of the negative stereotypes that are present in some sections of the media and in the political sphere. And finally, all Australians need to hear these stories. We're all living together, and the sharing of these stories and these experiences will help us to understand each other better.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be part of this important event. We at the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission feel that we have a very important job to do, but we know that there is a much bigger job to do in the world, and to see people like yourselves here today demonstrating that commitment and living that life is really important for us to understand as a state body.
70 years now, 70 years. And what we want to do is we want to raise awareness on this issue. It's one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. No one knows about this is happening. No one knows about it. There's no media. And we're trying to raise awareness.
But we have some natural forests. So in that area, we still have some places unknown by the Chilean people, by the military forces. So what we do every time there is a conflict, in this moment we are having a conflict, so we move into that land.
It is very complicated when you have no guns and you are helpless to protect yourself. I have seen this in refugee camps when the local people with a gun come to us and fight with us. What we have to do, we have to have a spear and shield, but it could not help that much because the bullet still go through the shield. In general, the protection need a lot of lobby. And this is what I have known. But by then we were disconnected with the world where the media can portray and also show other people that this is what is happening in this community. We did not have a media. We were disconnected, no telephone, nothing at all. So the protection was a hard thing. And in my views, most of the African countries, people are really suffering a lot because they find themselves defenseless and not protecting themselves. But it is easy for the diasporan people to advocate on their behalf in Australia. And this is what we did during the time when we had a South Sudan referendum. So the South Sudanese worked really hard to use those connections.
What is the role of the humanitarian groups who come into countries to help? You know, how does that interface actually assist with some of those issues around self-protection?
Well, I think the most important thing to recognise is that the international community is very often not there when the risk is the greatest. And it is coming in afterwards, and it's all being there before. And so from an international NGO's point of view, I think it's working with local groups, listening to local groups and building on local strategies and the way local people are working. Because if you don't do that, then when you go, or if you're not there at the moment of crisis, the work that you do goes with you. If you can hook in to civil society and civil society groups and organisations and work with them and support them, then what you're doing is you're strengthening what already exists, which is a wonderful community that wants to work for its own protection and for its own well-being and for its own children and for its own benefit.
People in diaspora could be able to mobilize themselves to lobby, whether it's a government body from overseas or developed world, or international agencies. And also, I'm talking about particularly these multinational companies who are dispossessing indigenous communities from their land and, creating a major conflict to stop doing what they are doing at the moment. So I think the diaspora community could be able to do this kind of stuff. How they're going to do it? First, they need to organize themselves and build their capacities. I think one of the activities, for example, with the African think tank we do at the moment is we are running a very successful leadership training program for the African communities. We graduated around 33 community leaders in partnership with Victoria University, Department of Immigration, the Victoria Police, Monash University, AMS, and other institutions. So it is really important to build up our community and capacity to be able to respond to those issues. I think the other critical, perhaps essential element is lobbying. So we have the capacity to lobby through media. We have the capacity to explain or express to the broader Australian communities what has happening on the ground overseas, so that the community could be able to understand, which is a public education. This is what we are doing over there and also here as well. So this is very critical. On the other hand also, it is essential and important for the grassroots community back home to be, to conduct peace education. So in order to be able to conduct peace education, we need to build their capacity. So our civil societies on the ground need to be very, very strong to conduct peace education.
One, and we haven't talked about this, but it's equally important, is that the remittances that are sent back by diaspora now total, around the world from developing countries to underdeveloping countries, now total about $180 billion. That is, the total official aid budget around the world is $120 billion. So it's 1.5 times the official aid budget. So that's the first thing. Now, in Australia, people remitting money overseas spend something like 20% of that to pay off Western Union and others. So the first thing I think we could do is actually lobby for more proportion of those remittances to go to the people that they're destined for. The second thing is one could imagine matching those remittances, particularly if they were going to build community infrastructure, like the Mexican government does. And therefore, that is do-it-yourself aid, if you like. It's not run by a lot of consultants and NGOs and bureaucrats. It's supporting people in their own processes. So I think that's one thing. I think the second thing is quite clearly what Akot has described and some others talk about is actually the brain gain, not the brain drain. It's how those competencies, that experience is then transferred back into the local. And I think we need to recognise that, because diasporas get a lot of bad press about how they interfere in political affairs and that sort of thing. But the good news stories really aren't told.
Complex area, but there are some very basic principles. We know from your very direct lived experience that it is about understanding what's happening at the ground, and what we've heard from the experts and people who've got direct experiences, it's about listening to people and starting where they're at and actually working with them to empower them to actually take control of their own destiny as best they can, whether that's building capacity or through financial assistance. And it's appropriate, I think, to recognise the work of the Humanitarian Crisis Hub as a resource, as a coordinating mechanism. And the way that we would conclude is to say we invite you all to certainly to look at the stalls, to talk to the people who've been generous enough to give the time and to tell some of their stories today. And if you have a particular interest in relation to your own country of origin, to talk to some of the staff from the Humanitarian Crisis Hub, Denise and others, so that we can continue to build on those principles of connection, of empowerment, of listening and building.